Luxury cars are built for speed, power, and status, but when things go wrong, the results can be deadly. In this video, we'll look at 5 real stories of disturbing car crash deaths involving high-end vehicles, cases that ended in destruction, confusion, and tragedy. These are not just accidents, they're warnings.
The man was pulled from the pool, and several lifeguards performed CPR until the paramedics and police arrived, but he was pronounced dead on the scene. 31-year-old Jerome Moody was just a guest at the party.
It was August 1985 in New Orleans, Louisiana. The New Orleans Recreation Department threw a party at a city pool, inviting over 200 people. Nearly half of them were certified lifeguards, watchful eyes trained to prevent tragedy. 4 remained on duty that evening just in case. Laughter echoed through the humid night air as lifeguards shared stories of close calls and proud saves. Among the guests was 31-year-old Jerome Moody. He wasn't a lifeguard. He was just there to enjoy the evening, standing quietly along the poolside, dressed in regular clothes, taking in the celebration from the sidelines. To most, he blended into the crowd, but as the evening wore on, the celebration took a chilling turn. As the pool began to clear and lifeguards prepared to wrap up the night, someone glanced into the deep end and froze. There, at the bottom of the pool, completely unnoticed until that moment, was Jerome, motionless, fully clothed, unmoving. Panic surged through the crowd. CPR was performed. Emergency crews were called, but it was too late. Jerome Moody had drowned, right in the middle of a party thrown to celebrate the fact that no one had. The irony hit like a wave. A man had lost his life surrounded by dozens of trained professionals in a place designed for safety on a night meant to mark success. The disbelief was immediate and gut-wrenching. An autopsy confirmed what the scene already suggested. Jerome had drowned. He hadn't been swimming with the others. He wasn't in a swimsuit, and no one saw him slip into the water. Whether it was an accident, a misstep, or something more remains unclear. In the blur of laughter and celebration, he had vanished without a sound. Madeline Richard, the director of the New Orleans Recreation Department, struggled to process the devastation, but Jerome Moody was more than a tragic headline. He was a dreamer, an entrepreneur, and a man who had built a life rooted in ambition and service. Born in Emporia, Virginia, Jerome moved to Portsmouth where he pursued education and dreamed of running his own business. He worked hard as a delivery driver and eventually fulfilled his goal, owning and operating Dee's Dry Cleaners in the Bronx for several years. Later, he returned to Virginia, earned a degree from Norfolk State University, and became a devoted community activist. He was deeply involved with Noble Street Baptist Church and the Wilson Ward Civic League. He was a father, a grandfather, a brother, and then, in a matter of moments, he was gone.
John Bonham, drummer with the British rock group Led Zeppelin since its inception in 1968, was found dead today at the home of a friend in Windsor, England.
It was September 24th, 1980. John Bonham, the thunderous heart of Led Zeppelin, was gearing up for something big. After 3 years off the road, the band was preparing to tour again. But for Bonham, the excitement was laced with something heavier. That morning, he started drinking. Not casually, forcefully. 4 stiff vodkas with breakfast, setting the tone for a day that would spiral out of control. Led Zeppelin's assistant, Rex King, picked him up. They were headed for rehearsals at guitarist Jimmy Page's estate in the quiet village of Bray, the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. But the drinks kept coming. As the band rehearsed, Bonham drank, and drank, and drank. No one stopped him. No one could. It was the kind of drinking they'd seen before, but this time it felt different. By the end of the session, Bonham was visibly out of it. Not just drunk, hollowed out, faded behind the eyes. Later that night, he was helped into a spare bedroom. The others knew the drill. They laid him on his side, just in case. Everyone went to bed, assuming tomorrow would come like it always had. But it didn't. The next morning, September 25th, something was wrong. Road manager Ben Lefebvre went to check on Bonham. The room was too quiet. Bonham wasn't moving. He was pale, unresponsive. Ben leaned in, searched for a pulse. Nothing. Panic surged. He called for help. An ambulance rushed in, but it was already too late. John Bonham was dead, 32 years old. The official cause, pulmonary aspiration. He choked on his own vomit in his sleep. An autopsy later revealed the extent of the damage. Over 40 shots of vodka had been consumed across 12 brutal hours. His liver was overwhelmed, his body slowly giving up long before the final breath. According to pathologist Dr. Edmund Hempstead, it hadn't been sudden. His body had been in shock for hours. The grief hit like a hammer. Bonham wasn't just a drummer. He was the engine, the earthquake beneath every Led Zeppelin song. When he died, something essential died with him, and just months later, on December 4th, 1980, the remaining members of the band released a statement. It was short, simple, devastating. They couldn't go on without him. Led Zeppelin was over. Fans couldn't believe it. A band that had shaped the sound of an era, silenced overnight. No farewell tour, no final album, just silence and questions. In the years that followed, the surviving members reunited only a few times. Each performance felt like a glimpse into a world that could have been. In 2007, they took the stage at London's O2 Arena. The show was electric, bittersweet. It was captured on Celebration Day, a live album that felt more like a eulogy than a comeback. Bonham's presence still loomed large, even in absence. John Paul Jones later described the moment they found Bonham's body, his voice heavy with sorrow and fury. In the book John Bonham, A Thunder of Drums, he relived the pain of that morning, the helplessness, the rage, the knowledge that someone so gifted, so vital, had slipped away because of a battle he couldn't win. Bonham had struggled with alcohol for years. It was no secret. While he'd moved past other substances, the bottle never loosened its grip. Those close to him saw the toll it took, the exhaustion, the sadness behind the laughter. In the weeks before his death, something had shifted. He was quieter, more withdrawn. Maybe no one wanted to admit what they feared. He loved fast cars, loud music, life at full speed, but the thing that made him brilliant also made him vulnerable. And in the end, it cost him everything. John Bonham redefined what it meant to be a rock drummer. The sheer power of his playing, the precision, the ferocity, was unlike anything the world had heard before. Kashmir, When the Levee Breaks, Moby Dick. His hands left fingerprints on history. Generations of drummers still study his work. No one's come close. But his story is more than music. It's a cautionary tale about the cost of excess, about the silence that surrounds addiction, about how the people we admire the most can be fighting the hardest battles behind the scenes.
2 people are dead after a car crash that left one car cut in half this afternoon, according to Dallas Fire Rescue. Happened about 3:15 this afternoon at Abrams Road near Royal Lane in the Lake Highlands area.
It was December afternoon in Dallas, Texas, just after 3 p.m. A black McLaren hypercar shot down Abrams Road like a bullet, slicing through traffic with terrifying speed. Witnesses later said the engine wasn't just loud, it screamed. This wasn't a casual drive. This was raw, unleashed power. Inside the car were 2 men, 29-year-old Cristoel Flores Espino and 31-year-old Robert Leroy Rocha. The street they were on wasn't a racetrack. It was lined with homes, families, and children just released from Forest Meadow Middle School. And yet, the McLaren surged forward, swallowing distance with every blink. As the car neared the intersection of Abrams Road and Royal Lane, it lost control. The hypercar veered sharply, the tires screeching against the asphalt, and then, impact. The McLaren struck a massive tree with such force that the car split in two. By the time emergency crews from Dallas Fire Rescue arrived, the scene was already chaos. Pieces of the car were everywhere. Phones recorded the devastation, and Cristoel and Robert, both gone, pronounced dead at the scene. Their bodies trapped in wreckage so mangled it took heavy rescue tools just to get close. This wasn't an accident. It was a full-speed annihilation, and it didn't end there. Another vehicle, a gold Toyota sedan, had been hit or forced off the road. A woman was inside. She'd crashed into a separate tree during the chaos. Her car's front end was crushed, but she was alive. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. Non-life-threatening injuries, they said. But she was shaken, broken, and lucky to be alive. The sound of the crash had drawn neighbors from their homes. Some ran toward the wreck. Others stood frozen on their lawns. 911 calls flooded in. Within minutes, the road was shut down. Photos and videos hit the internet fast. The McLaren was nearly unrecognizable. Its front half, the section carrying both men, had been crumpled into something that no longer resembled a car. The rear sat isolated in the street like some eerie monument to what had just happened. It was believed to be a McLaren 570S coupe, a masterpiece of engineering, a machine capable of hitting 62 miles per hour in just over 3 seconds, with a top speed north of 200. It was not built for roads like Abrams, not meant for school zones. Police began their investigation immediately. Lieutenant Tracy Jones told reporters they were looking at everything: speed, distractions, mechanical failure. There were no signs of a police chase, no reports of a stolen vehicle. At that point, no confirmation of substances involved. Just a silent, urgent question. Why? The location made everything worse. This wasn't just any street. It was a zone where children cross every afternoon, where families walk hand in hand, a place where a speeding supercar doesn't just risk lives, it threatens an entire community's sense of safety. By morning, candles and flowers had appeared beneath the tree. Locals left handwritten notes. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood and stared at the damage. Though Christoel and Robert weren't celebrities, their deaths rippled through the neighborhood like a shock wave. The street felt different now, heavier, quieter, broken. The McLaren 570S is made from carbon fiber, a material known for absorbing extreme impacts, but no engineering can compensate for decisions made in a split second at terrifying speed. The front of the car was so violently crushed it looked like it had been folded in half. The rear, though almost intact, had been hurled away with such force it might as well have belonged to a different vehicle. No one inside stood a chance. The woman in the Toyota survived and began helping police understand what happened in the final seconds. Her version of events helped clarify the scene, but not the why. That question lingers. Investigators are still combing through footage, vehicle data, and witness statements. They want to know, was it reckless speed alone? Or did something else trigger the crash? A mechanical failure? A moment of panic? A decision that couldn't be taken back?
Did you know that a daredevil met his end in the most unexpected way? Bobby Leach, who survived plunging over Niagara Falls in a steel barrel in 1911, didn't meet his end in some wild stunt. In 1926, he slipped on an orange peel while walking down the street.
It was July 25th, 1911 in Niagara Falls, Ontario. All eyes were on one man, a 54-year-old former Barnum and Bailey circus performer named Bobby Leach. For years, Bobby had talked a big game. He claimed he could outdo Annie Edson Taylor, the schoolteacher who had become the first person to survive a plunge over Niagara Falls in a barrel a decade earlier. Despite Taylor's famous warning, nobody ought to ever do that again, Bobby was convinced. He would not only survive the falls, he would do it better, tougher, and louder. He was a natural daredevil. Years before, he'd parachuted into the Niagara River after leaping off the Upper Steel Arch Bridge. He owned a restaurant on Bridge Street in Niagara Falls, where he'd often regale his customers with stories and his big plan to conquer Horseshoe Falls in a barrel of his own design. After countless delays, growing expenses, and mounting anticipation, the moment had come. His vessel was no ordinary wooden barrel. It was cylindrical, made of steel, and outfitted with wooden bumpers at both ends. The crowd's energy was electric as word spread that Bobby was already in the water. At about 3 p.m., a speeding car pulled up at Table Rock. The driver jumped out, breathless, and shouted, "Bobby's on his way!" The crowd leaned forward. Thousands watched as the barrel raced down the Niagara River, bobbing and spinning in the churning current. As it neared the brink of the mighty Horseshoe Falls, it struck a rock. The impact was brutal. One of the front bumpers was torn away, and inside Bobby was slammed hard, his forehead gashed open. Still, the barrel held. Then, at exactly 3:13 p.m., it happened. The crowd fell silent. The only sound was the thunderous roar of the falls. The barrel dropped. The world seemed to stop as the cylinder vanished into the foaming abyss. Seconds passed like hours. Then, cheers, a shout from the crowd. "There he is!" Dozens more followed. The barrel had reappeared, battered but intact, bobbing in the whirlpool below. But was Bobby alive? For 20 agonizing minutes, the barrel swirled in an eddy, refusing to come to shore. Finally, Fred Bender, an employee of the Ontario Power Company, tied a rope around his waist and dove into the icy water. With strength and courage, he reached the barrel and secured it. Helpers pulled them both to safety. The crowd surged forward. Harry Williams, owner of the Lafayette Hotel, pounded on the side of the barrel. Silence. Then, 3 faint knocks from inside. Bobby was alive. When they pried the barrel open, Bobby was bloodied and broken. He had a gash on his head, both kneecaps shattered, and his jaw was fractured. Still, dazed and groaning, he asked for 2 things: some oxygen and a cigar. 6 months in the hospital followed. He would never fully recover, but his fame exploded. When he returned to Niagara Falls in 1920, he opened a pool hall and resumed his daredevil lifestyle. He toured the world with his wife, bringing his battered barrel along. He told his story in crowded theaters and small town halls, his name whispered in awe, Bobby Leach, the man who faced the falls and lived. But the man who beat Niagara could not outrun fate. In 1926, while on a publicity tour in Auckland, New Zealand, Bobby stepped on a discarded orange peel. He slipped, fell hard, and broke his leg. It seemed minor, just another bump for a man who had faced death and won. But this time, it was different. Antibiotics had not yet been discovered. The wound became infected. Gangrene set in. Doctors tried everything. They amputated the leg in a desperate bid to save him. But Bobby's body was too weak. He died during surgery on April 28, 1926. He was 69 years old. He was laid to rest in Auckland's Hillsborough Cemetery. His gravestone reads, "In loving memory of Bobby Leach, world famous for his trip over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Died 28th of April, 1926, aged 69 years. R.I.P. The man who roared into history in a steel barrel and left it quietly on a peel of fruit." It was a warm September afternoon in Sardinia, Italy. Rolling hills, stone villas, and tight, winding roads framed the perfect setting for the Sardinia supercar experience, a luxury rally where Ferraris and Lamborghinis raced through the countryside like bolts of lightning. Among the exotic cars was a red Ferrari Portofino driven by 67-year-old Marcus Crowley, with his 63-year-old wife, Melissa, in the passenger seat. The Swiss couple from Wallace, near Zurich, shared a love for travel, speed, and each other. Marcus ran a successful logistics firm across Europe, and Melissa worked in HR at the same company. The supercar rally, priced between £10,000 and £21,000, was just another adventure in their storybook life. Ahead of them, a blue Lamborghini Huracan glided along the narrow 195 Salsitana State Road. Behind the wheel was Indian billionaire Vikas Oberoi, with his wife, Bollywood actress Gayatri Joshi, beside him. The road north from Fort Village to Morris was picturesque but perilous. 2 narrow lanes, no room for mistakes. Then came the camper van. Slow and steady, the white van became a roadblock for the roaring supercars. But patience was scarce that day. A dashcam, later revealed to belong to a German tourist, captured what happened next. The Lamborghini attempted to overtake the van, crossing a solid white line, illegal in Italy. At that exact moment, Marcus tried to pass both vehicles in the Ferrari. The Lamborghini veered into the Ferrari's path. In seconds, metal clashed. The Ferrari clipped the Lamborghini and lost control, while the Lamborghini slammed into the camper, flipping it onto its side. The Ferrari veered off-road, hit an embankment, and erupted into flames. Thick smoke rose into the sky. Trapped inside, Marcus and Melissa were heard screaming, but by the time emergency crews arrived, including an air ambulance, the Ferrari was a smoldering wreck. Neither survived. The camper's passengers, a couple from northern Italy, were shaken but alive. They crawled out and were treated for minor injuries. The Lamborghini had come to rest at the bottom of a slope. Gayatri Joshi was seen crying on the roadside, while Vikas stood nearby, frozen in disbelief. Police quickly launched an investigation. All 3 vehicles were seized. The dashcam footage showed the Lamborghini crossing a solid line. A key detail, though not formally charged, Vikas Oberoi was placed under investigation for double road homicide, an offense that could carry up to 7 years in prison. Yet, he was allowed to return to India days later. Meanwhile, footage of other rally drivers running red lights and breaking laws surfaced online, exposing the darker side of the event. What was sold as luxury began to look more like recklessness on parade. For Marcus and Melissa, the thrill became a tragedy. They had chased one more unforgettable ride and paid the ultimate price, a moment of impatience, a misjudged pass, and in an instant everything ended. The road was closed for hours. Investigators examined the wreckage, charred rubber, twisted steel, and the lingering smell of fire. In Switzerland, their co-workers mourned the loss of 2 lives once so full of motion, and now 2 seats in that red Ferrari remained forever empty, a haunting symbol of how even in paradise, speed and power can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. It was a night in January 2022 in Vula. The red Ferrari appeared. Zortsis Manoios, a 45-year-old businessman from Mykonos, was in the car. It was his first drive in the car he'd waited years to own. A Ferrari 488 worth £250,000. To the world, Zortsis was more than a businessman. Nearly 2 decades earlier, he'd stepped into the public eye at just 23, appearing on the Greek version of The Wall, a popular reality show. A computer science student at the time, his calm presence and gentle eyes made him a standout. A brief romance with fellow contestant Giannakopoulou didn't last long, but it kept his name alive in the media long after the cameras stopped rolling. After the show, he left the spotlight behind and returned to Mykonos. There, he built something real, a clothing brand called Georgie. It started with one store, then another. Tourists knew his name. Locals respected it. He wasn't flashy, but he had charm. With Athena, he had 2 children. But all of that shattered in seconds. Just under 2 miles from the dealership where he'd picked up his dream car, Zortsis was driving along Constantinou Karamanli Street. At some point, something appeared on the road. A pedestrian, witnesses would later say. Zortsis reacted. The Ferrari swerved, and then came the sound dot. The car slammed into a tree. The front crumpled like paper. Flames exploded almost instantly, lighting up the night like a flare. Greek singer Stan happened to be driving behind them. He saw it all. He watched the fire ignite. Without hesitating, he ran toward the wreck. Athena had been partially thrown from the car, injured, broken, but still reachable. Stan got to her just in time. He pulled her away from the inferno as the fire surged. She collapsed, burned and bloodied, but alive. Zortsis was still inside. His body was trapped behind the wheel, flames licking the interior. Another relative who had been following in a separate car arrived seconds later and tried to reach him, but it was too late. Bystanders stood helpless as the Ferrari was consumed in fire. Footage taken by onlookers showed the car engulfed, the paint blistering off, the metal turning black in seconds. Zortsis's body was found inside, charred beyond recognition. The drive had lasted just minutes. His life ended almost as soon as it began anew. Athena was rushed to the General State Hospital of Nicaea. For days, her condition remained uncertain, but she survived. Police launched an investigation immediately. Zortsis's sister, Katerina Manoios, a member of the Greek parliament, was flooded with messages from across the country. People remembered her brother not for the flames, but for his warmth, his gentleness, his quiet strength. In the years that followed, Athena recovered physically, but the emotional scars never faded. She and Katerina focused on one thing, raising the children in a way that honored who Zortsis was, calm, kind, and deeply loved.
Niwot High School student is dead tonight, the victim of what police call a tragic, unintended shooting in Longmont.
It was March 15th, 2013, in Longmont, Colorado. In a nearly empty rental house on the edge of town, 18-year-old Premila Lal was spending time with friends, laughing, joking, just being her usual radiant self. She had recently graduated from Niwot High School, known for her bright spirit and blazing speed on the track. She was the kind of girl who lit up a room without even trying. That night, she had no idea her life was about to end. Premila and her 12-year-old cousin had come up with a harmless prank, a simple joke, nothing malicious. They planned to surprise a close family friend, 21-year-old Narek Daniel Gailey, who was hanging out at the rental house with her 15-year-old brother Punil. The house, nearly empty as the family was mid-move, felt like the perfect setting for a light scare. But pranks rely on laughter. This one never reached that point. The girls slipped quietly into a closet, waiting, giggling softly, unaware of what would unfold next. In the other room, Gailey and Punil began hearing strange sounds, creaking floors, muffled rustling. Their confusion turned quickly into fear. With no one else expected in the house, they assumed the worst, an intruder. Tension grew fast. Then, in a moment that would never be undone, Premila leapt from the shadows, likely laughing, expecting surprise, maybe a scream, maybe a chuckle. But instead of laughter, there was panic. In a flash, Gailey grabbed a nearby gun and fired. Time slowed. A single shot, loud, final, irreversible. It hit Premila. Her cousin screamed. Punil froze, and Gailey, trembling, realized what he had done. There was no time to think, only react. They rushed her to Longmont United Hospital, praying for a miracle, begging fate to turn back, even just a few minutes. But by 9 p.m., it was over. Premila Lal, beloved daughter, sister friend was gone. Outside, neighbors had heard shouting and chaos. One woman called the police at 8:02 p.m., her voice thick with concern. Officers arrived to find the front door ajar, the scene disjointed, confused, already soaked in grief. Goley was arrested early the next morning. The charges were serious: reckless endangerment, allowing a minor access to a firearm. The investigation uncovered chilling details. The weapon had been in the hands of Primila's younger brother before the shooting, despite their parents' clear disapproval. Worse still, the gun was found later, still loaded, still jammed, lying near the living room stairs. It had been left out in the open, a silent threat hiding in plain sight. Galey, with few ties to the community, was considered a flight risk. Police worked with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, weighing the evidence, debating whether more charges would follow. His attorney stayed silent, but the law was only part of the story. For Primila's family, especially her father, Pravin Lal, the pain was unspeakable. He stood before reporters, raw with sorrow, trying to find the words. He spoke of his daughter as a ray of sunshine, someone who made life brighter just by existing. And yet, in the face of such unthinkable loss, he didn't lash out in anger. His heartbreak was laced with something rare: compassion. They had lost their daughter, but he didn't want another family to lose a son. Even in devastation, they chose grace. Primila had been a vibrant soul, deeply loved and deeply rooted in her community. She wasn't just known, she was cherished. Her high school track team held a memorial meet in her name. Teammates ran for her, cried for her, remembered her laughter echoing across finish lines and locker rooms. She had dreams, she had plans, and now she was just gone. Longmont, once a sleepy farming town, had grown into a modern tech hub. But no amount of growth or progress could prepare it for the echo left behind by Primila's death. The community was stunned, wounded, asking the same questions that haunted her family. What if the prank had been called off? In the days that followed, people tried to make sense of it, tried to understand how joy could turn to death in a matter of seconds. But there were no real answers, only a cold truth. Once a bullet is fired, you can't take it back. Primila Lal's story wasn't about malice, it wasn't about crime, it was about tragedy, about how fast life can shatter when fear and firearms collide, about how a moment meant for laughter can end in heartbreak. She is not here to tell her story, but we are, and we must. It was midnight on January 4th, 2005 on Interstate 80 near Lincoln, Nebraska. Derek Kiefer, just 21 years old, was heading back to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln after spending the holidays in San Antonio. The semester was about to start. He had big plans. He was in the back seat of a Ford Explorer. His friend Luke Homan was driving, and another friend, Nick Uphoff, sat in the front passenger seat. All three were fraternity brothers, more like brothers in life. Derek wasn't just another college student. He was chasing 5 majors. And he wasn't just scraping by. He had a perfect 4.0 GPA. He had studied at Oxford. He wanted law school next. Everyone could see it. Derek was going places. But on that icy stretch of road, fate had a cruel twist waiting. A trucker driving nearby spotted the Ford Explorer lose control. One moment it was steady. The next, it skidded, spun, and then rolled violently, flipping over and over before crashing into a frozen ditch. The call to 911 came fast, and first responders arrived quickly. But when they did, the scene was already marked by silence. Derek had been thrown from the vehicle. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. His body was found outside, still and cold, lying in the snow. There was no bringing him back. Inside the wreck, Luke and Nick survived, bruised, battered, but alive. They'd been wearing seatbelts. The news shattered everything. Derek's father, Paul Kiefer, was numb with disbelief. He had moved to Lincoln just to be closer to his son, to be there for the journey, the milestones. Now he was facing the unimaginable. "I'm in shock," he said quietly in an interview, barely able to find the words. Friends were crushed. Cade Pittman, who had known Derek since 7th grade, struggled to hold back the heartbreak. "He'd do anything for anybody," Cade said. "He tutored me in classes he didn't even take." That's the kind of guy he was. Cade had just seen him before Christmas break. Now he would never see him again. As investigators pieced together what had happened, Captain Joe Lear of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office confirmed what many feared. Icy roads had caused the crash. Alcohol wasn't a factor. It wasn't reckless driving. It was winter's quiet menace and one missing click of a seatbelt. And that's when the deeper irony struck. Just 4 months before his death, Derek had written a column for the Daily Nebraskan. The headline, "Individual Rights Buckle Under Seatbelt Laws." In that piece, Derek argued passionately that seatbelt laws were an overreach of government power. "It is my choice what type of safety precautions I take," he wrote. Those words now echoed with haunting weight. The very argument he made, the belief he stood behind, had become the cause of his own death. His refusal to wear a seatbelt wasn't about rebellion or carelessness. It was a decision, one rooted in principle. But principles can't stop physics. ICE doesn't care about ideology, and the windshield doesn't negotiate freedom. Derek's death hit the university like a thunderclap. A brilliant light extinguished in a moment. A student who should have been in class the next week, sitting in the front row, raising his hand. A future lawyer, a friend, a son. What makes this story more painful is what it could have been. A scare, a lesson, a bruised memory. But it wasn't. It became a headline, a eulogy, a cautionary tale. And it begs the question, how often do we cling to freedom without weighing the cost? In the United Kingdom, when seatbelt laws were introduced in 1983, fatal front seat injuries dropped 29% in 1 year. In 2017, seatbelts saved nearly 15,000 lives in the United States. The data is undeniable, yet still some resist. Still some believe they'll be fine, that it's their choice, that nothing will happen to them. Derek believed that, and now he's gone. His death isn't just a tragedy, it's a mirror, a moment to pause and ask, what choices are we making every day without realizing how much hangs in the balance?
It's time to go out. Guys gonna be going down. We are going to Dreams in the next few minutes. It's gonna be going down.
It was the early morning of November 8th, 2020 in Harare, Zimbabwe. Inside a Rolls-Royce Wraith, a sleek, powerful machine worth $500,000, sat 4 people who had no idea their lives were minutes from ending in fire and screams. At the wheel was Genius Kadungure, known to thousands as Ginimbi, one of Zimbabwe's most iconic public figures. He had just left his mansion in Domboshava after a night at Dreams nightclub, a venue he owned. It had been a night of flashing lights and flowing champagne, a celebration for Moana. Michelle Amuli, a rising fitness coach and influencer who had just turned 26. She was in the car, glowing from the night's festivities. Alongside her were 2 others, Lumumba Karim, a Malawian businessman with a shadowy past, and a woman from Mozambique, known only as Alicia. Hours earlier, Ginimbi had posted to Instagram his last ever story telling his 600,000 followers they were heading out to continue the party. As the Rolls-Royce glided through the dim streets around 5 a.m., witnesses say the car picked up speed. One man, Danny Kawanga, was driving along Borrowdale Road when he saw it, the Wraith hurtling past him like a silver bullet. Ginimbi attempted to overtake another vehicle, and then in a split second, everything went wrong. A blue Honda Fit appeared from the opposite direction. The Rolls-Royce slammed into it head-on. The luxury car spun out of control, smashed into a tree, and exploded into flames. Witnesses rushed to the scene. One of them, Kawanga, said Ginimbi had been thrown from the car during the crash. He was conscious, barely. 3 men pulled him from the wreckage and laid him on the ground. Within 5 minutes, his body gave out. The others were still inside, trapped. The doors were jammed. People nearby used tree branches and plastic buckets of water, desperate to save them. But it wasn't enough. Inside, Moana, Karim, and Alicia screamed for help. Screams that witnesses say still haunt them to this day. Then silence. By the time emergency crews arrived, it was over. The fire had done its worst. The bodies inside were burned beyond recognition. It took hours to remove the remains from the twisted shell of the once pristine Wraith. The aftermath sent shockwaves across the country. Ginimbi had built his empire from nothing, starting his first gas business at 17. By the time of his death, his fortune was estimated between £7 million and £76 million. He flaunted his collection of Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, and lived like a king, throwing wild parties that reportedly cost up to $50,000 each. But behind the wealth was a cloud of suspicion. Ginimbi had been investigated for financial misconduct, and some of his cars had even been seized by authorities. He was also tied by family to Mary Mubaiwa, the estranged wife of Zimbabwe's vice president. His life was as controversial as it was glamorous. Then there was Karim, a fugitive in his own country, wanted for his alleged role in the infamous 2013 Cashgate scandal in Malawi, a scheme involving over £24 million in missing public funds. He had relocated to South Africa to avoid arrest. His presence in that car only deepened the mystery and intrigue of the tragedy. Moana's death was perhaps the most heartbreaking. She had built a name in Zimbabwe's entertainment world, featured in music videos, active on social media, admired by many young women. As for Alicia, no one knows much. Her full identity remains largely a mystery. One witness later said Ganimbi had tried to return to the wreckage, trying to pull his friends out, but the explosion came too fast. He didn't stand a chance. It was the night of October 15th, 2021, in the quiet town of Naualpa, Juarez, Mexico. A young woman stepped out into the darkness. She wore a flowing white gown, a pale veil draped over her head, her voice slicing through the silence with a chilling cry. "Ay, mis hijos." It was meant to be a prank, a Halloween scare. She had always loved the season, ghost stories, costumes, the playful thrill of fear. That night, she decided to bring one of Mexico's most infamous legends to life, La Llorona, the Weeping Woman. According to folklore, La Llorona was a mother cursed to wander the earth after a tragic act took her children away. Her cries echo through the night, warning those who hear them that something terrible is near. It's a tale every Mexican child grows up with, a myth told to keep kids from wandering too far, especially near rivers. But even grown-ups know, when you hear her, you listen. Dressed in white, the woman moved slowly through the San Miguel de Rami neighborhood. Her goal wasn't harm. She simply wanted to spook a few neighbors, stir up the Halloween spirit. She had no idea the fear she was igniting. One neighbor spotted her from a distance, a ghostly figure veiled, moving silently through the night and crying into the void. Confused, they began filming, uncertain whether this was a Halloween trick or something unexplainable. As the woman moved from one street to the next, others caught sight of her. Whispers spread, doors locked, lights flicked on. Someone, somewhere, let fear take control. In a moment of pure panic, a resident, unnamed and still unknown to this day, reached for a gun. Maybe they thought they were facing something evil. Maybe they didn't stop to think at all. What's clear is this. Shots rang out in the dead of night. The young woman collapsed onto the pavement. The streets fell silent again. The shooter disappeared into the darkness as quickly as they had acted. By the time authorities arrived, it was too late. The woman lay motionless on the street, the victim of a prank gone tragically, horrifically wrong. No name, no ID, just a costume, and an idea that should have been harmless. News of the incident spread fast. It happened just days before Dia de los Muertos, Mexico's Day of the Dead, a sacred time for honoring lost loved ones. The timing made everything feel even more surreal. Social media exploded with footage of the young woman moments before the shooting, her eerie wails, her slow walk through the fog. People were torn. Some were horrified at the overreaction. Others said fear can make people do dangerous things. But one question lingered above all. Did it really have to end this way? As the days passed, authorities promised an investigation, but no arrests were made. The identity of the shooter remained a mystery, and the woman, this anonymous soul who only wanted to play a part in a ghost story, was mourned without a name. It was September 4th, 2006 in Queensland, Australia. Steve Irwin, the famed wildlife expert known as the Crocodile Hunter, was filming a documentary titled Ocean's Deadliest at Bat Reef, part of the Great Barrier Reef. At 44 years old, Irwin was at the peak of his career. He was adored worldwide for his daring encounters with dangerous animals. Steve had married Terry Irwin, and together they had 2 children, Bindi and Robert. His passion for wildlife began early. At just 6 years old, he caught a venomous brown snake, and by 9, he was already wrestling crocodiles. These early experiences shaped his future, eventually leading him to manage Beerwah Reptile and Fauna Park, which his parents had started in 1970. Under Steve's leadership, the park was renamed Australia Zoo, and his larger-than-life personality catapulted him to global fame, most notably through his hit TV series, The Crocodile Hunter. By July 2006, Steve was riding high. He and Terry had just plotted out a 10-year plan for the zoo, and he was passionate about spreading his conservation message to the world. He often said, "If we don't get animals into people's hearts, they will go extinct. We're running out of time." But just a few months later, his dedication to wildlife would lead to a tragic and ironic end. On that fateful day in September, bad weather had delayed their original plan to film tiger sharks. Restless and eager to make use of the day, Irwin and his crew, including his close friend and longtime cameraman Justin Lyons, set out in an inflatable boat to film alternative footage. Soon, they spotted an 8-foot-wide stingray, perfect for another project they were working on. Stingrays are generally peaceful creatures. If disturbed, they usually swim away. But this one acted differently. As Irwin and Lyons prepared for one final shot, the stingray suddenly attacked. It propped itself up and began striking with its tail, wildly and rapidly. Lyons recalled the horrifying moment. All of a sudden, it propped on its front and started stabbing wildly with its tail, hundreds of strikes in a few seconds. One of the strikes hit Steve in the chest with a force Lyons likened to a hot knife through butter. Steve stood up in a pool of blood. Lyons immediately knew something was terribly wrong. They pulled him into the boat and raced back to their main vessel, Croc 1. Steve was conscious, but in extreme pain. He told Lyons, "It punctured my lung." But the reality was even worse. The stingray's barb had pierced his heart. Desperate to keep him alive, Lyons and the crew performed CPR for over an hour, urging him to think of his children. Steve looked at Justin Lyons and said his final words, "I'm dying." Despite their efforts, by the time they reached medical help, it was too late. The stingray's strike had caused catastrophic damage to his heart, making survival impossible. The news of Steve Irwin's death stunned the world. A man known for fearlessly handling crocodiles, snakes, and some of the deadliest animals on the planet was brought down by a stingray, an animal often referred to as the pussycat of the ocean. Toxicologist Jamie Seymour, who was also aboard Croc 1 that day, later explained, "It was just a really bad accident. Under some circumstances, it just goes wrong." Steve Irwin's death left a deep void in the world of wildlife conservation. Steve's legacy lives on, through his family, through Australia Zoo, and through the millions of people around the world he inspired to care about wildlife. It was July 29th, 2011, in the quiet town of Durham Sud, Quebec. 38-year-old Chantal Lavigne, a mother of two, lay motionless beneath layers of cellophane and mud covered in blankets, her breathing shallow, her skin burning hot. She had come seeking transformation. What she found was death. Chantal wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She was searching for meaning, craving clarity, peace, some connection beyond the chaos of daily life. Since 2007, she had thrown herself into the world of New Age spirituality, exploring healing workshops, energy rituals, and alternative therapies. After the birth of her second child in 2009, her hunger for spiritual growth intensified. She wanted more than just comfort. She wanted transcendence. That summer, she believed she was on the cusp of a breakthrough. The seminar she signed up for was called Dying in Consciousness, led by a self-proclaimed spiritual guide named Gabrielle Frechette. She claimed to channel an ancient mythical being named Melchizedek. To her devoted followers, this wasn't absurd, it was divine truth. Chantal had been warned. Her family had watched her drift further from them, deeper into this belief system. She canceled a family camping trip to attend the seminar. It wasn't just a weekend retreat to her. It was a test, a transformation. She believed it was necessary for her soul. Gabrielle Frechette, along with assistants Jeanette Duclos and Gerald Fontaine, promised purification, cleansing of the body and spirit. What they delivered was torment. 9 people, including Chantal, entered the farmhouse that day. The ritual was brutal. Each participant was smeared with mud, wrapped tightly in plastic wrap, covered in thick blankets. Cardboard boxes were placed over their heads to trap the heat and restrict air. They were told to hyperventilate, to push through, sweat it out, cleanse themselves. It was hot, stifling. The room had no ventilation. This was not a traditional sweat lodge. There was no cultural foundation, no safety precautions, no trained oversight. It was a grotesque imitation, twisted into something dangerous. The hours dragged on, 9 of them. One person collapsed and had to leave. Another experienced distress so severe they nearly passed out. Still, Chantal pressed on. Maybe she believed pain was part of the journey. Maybe she thought the breaking point was where real change began. But her body had reached its limit. Her temperature soared past 40.5 degrees Celsius, over 104.9 degrees Fahrenheit. She stopped responding. Her body, dehydrated and overheating, began shutting down. Finally, Far too late, Frechette, who had no medical training, called emergency services. By the time paramedics arrived, Chantal was unresponsive. She was rushed to the hospital. Doctors tried to revive her. They couldn't. She died from hyperthermia and multi-organ failure. The autopsy compared her internal condition to being cooked alive. The news stunned Quebec and rippled across Canada. How could something like this happen? How could a woman who wanted healing die in such horror? Authorities quickly launched an investigation. The farmhouse was examined, the organizers questioned. What emerged was chilling. No medical screenings had been done. No safety precautions were in place. Airflow had been deliberately restricted. The so-called ritual was reckless and unscientific. 3 years later, justice arrived. Though for Chantal's family, it was too late. In December 2014, Gabrielle Frechette, Jeanette Duclos, and Gerald Fontaine were convicted of criminal negligence causing death. Frechette was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The others received 2 years each. During the trial, Quebec Court Judge Alain Fabi stressed how irresponsible, even callous, the ritual had been. In a hot, humid environment, restricting airflow was not just uncomfortable, it was deadly. And the leaders had done nothing to assess whether the participants were even healthy enough to endure it. They had chosen belief over safety, blind faith over responsibility. Experts were horrified. Diane Cote, a criminologist at the University of Montreal, called for greater oversight of fringe spiritual groups. She warned that without proper regulation, these movements, often cloaked in promises of enlightenment, could become fatal traps for vulnerable people. Chantal Lavigne was one of them. But she wasn't foolish. She was seeking truth. She believed in something better. She wanted healing, a deeper connection to the universe, to be more than just a mother, a partner, a woman carrying debt and exhaustion. She wanted to rise above all of that. Instead, she died in agony, alone beneath plastic and mud.
Alzheimer's disease is the commonest form of dementia, and it is thought that about 1 in 11 people over the age of 65 will have some kind of dementia.
It was the early hours of March 9th, 2023, in Donnybrook, Dublin. The house was silent, one of those heavy, still silences that hangs in the air before something awful breaks it. Albie had been caring for her 92-year-old father, Tom MacDonald, for over a year. After her mother, Viola, entered a nursing home, Tom moved in. He'd been diagnosed with dementia 5 years earlier, and recently, the confusion had worsened. Some days gentle, some days jarring, but nothing prepared her for what happened that night. Around 3:30 a.m., she heard movement. Not unusual. Tom often woke at odd hours, mistaking night for morning. She waited, assuming he'd returned to bed. 20 minutes passed. Still no sound. She got up. In the kitchen, Tom stood by the counter, hunched and pale. "I don't feel right," he said. "I ate something." She looked at the bowl in front of him. Cornflakes. But the milk was purple. It wasn't milk. It was washing detergent. Albie's voice trembled. "Did you eat this?" Tom nodded. Twice. He was already vomiting, clutching his throat, whispering that it burned. Panic surged. Albie called for an ambulance, barely able to hold the phone. Paramedics arrived quickly. Tom's condition was already critical. He was rushed to St. Vincent's University Hospital, sedated to stabilize him, but the detergent had torn through his insides, reached his lungs. By 8:50 a.m., Tom MacDonald was gone. The official cause, aspiration pneumonitis, a chemical burn from within, no antidote, no undoing it. Just hours earlier, he'd been alive, confused, but there. Now, the family was left shattered. He had only wanted breakfast. Tom had always clung to independence. Even as dementia dimmed his memory, he kept trying. Sometimes he ate spoiled food, but never anything like this. The detergent had been in a separate cupboard, away from the fridge. Albie never imagined he'd confuse it with milk, but dementia dulls the senses. Taste, smell, logic. Experts later said he might not have even noticed the taste. His mind, slipping further each week, had led him into danger, and no one could pull him back. His other daughter, Akling, couldn't comprehend how quickly it happened. He was just there, she said, and then he wasn't. The inquest revealed a harsh truth, how fragile safety becomes when dementia is involved. A single moment of confusion can end everything. The coroner ruled the death accidental, but urged awareness. She referred the case to the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland and the Health Service executive, because it could happen again, to anyone. Tom MacDonald wasn't just a case file. He had lived a full life, serving in the Defense Forces, raising 5 children, working as an accountant. He laughed, he loved, he mattered. But in the end, it wasn't illness or age that took him. It was a tragic mistake, a bowl of cereal, and something that looked like milk in the dark.
The captain, the first officer, and the flight engineer survived the crash. But the first officer died of smoke inhalation when trying to help the survivors of Flight 655.
It was October 20th, 1986, in Koltsovo Airport in the Soviet city of Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg, Aeroflot. Flight 6502 was preparing for departure. The destination, Grozny, with a planned stop in Samara. On board were 94 people, 87 passengers and 7 crew members. The captain, Alexander Kluyev, was a veteran pilot, highly experienced. But that day, he made a decision that defied all logic, a dangerous, ego-driven wager. He turned to his first officer, Gennady Zhirnov, and bet him that he could land the plane using only the aircraft's instruments, without looking out the window, just the cold dials and numbers in front of him. It was madness. And yet, Zhirnov agreed. Maybe he trusted Kluyev too much. Maybe he didn't think the captain would actually go through with it. But he did. At 3:48 p.m., just 2 minutes from the runway, Captain Kluyev gave the fateful order: close the cockpit curtains, black out the windows. The flight deck was now flying blind. As the plane descended, warning alarms screamed inside the cockpit. Ground proximity alerts, overspeed indicators. Everything told them they were coming in too fast, too low, too soon. Air traffic control picked up on the danger immediately and gave the order: abort the landing, pull up, circle back, try again. But Captain Kluyev ignored them. He stayed the course. Maybe he thought he could prove his point. Maybe he couldn't back down from the bet. Whatever the reason, he refused to act. Seconds later, Flight 6502 slammed into the runway at nearly 170 miles per hour. The impact was brutal. The aircraft bounced violently, then overran the tarmac. Fire spread rapidly through the fuselage, trapping dozens of passengers in their seats. Some tried to claw their way out. Others never had a chance. Emergency crews raced to the wreckage, but the damage was overwhelming. Of the 94 people on board, 63 died instantly. Another 7 would succumb to their injuries later. Among the dead was First Officer Zhirnov, the man who had agreed to the challenge but spent his final moments helping passengers escape. He collapsed from a fatal cardiac event on the way to the hospital. His last act was one of courage and heartbreak. And yet, amid the devastation, a miracle. All 14 children on board survived. In the hours that followed, Soviet authorities scrambled to contain the narrative. The KGB quickly locked down the crash site. News was suppressed. Photos were classified. For years, the outside world knew little of what had truly happened. It wasn't until a fire department chief, Colonel A.K. Karpov, quietly smuggled out images of the wreckage that the truth began to surface. The investigation was swift and damning. Kluyev was found solely responsible for the disaster. He had disregarded every protocol, ignored multiple warnings, and gambled with nearly 100 lives. In June 1987, Kluyev stood trial. He was convicted of violating aviation safety regulations and sentenced to 15 years in prison. But in another cruel twist, he served only 6. For the families of the victims, that wasn't justice. That was another wound, another insult added to their grief. It was just after 3 a.m. on a quiet Sunday morning, October 2nd, 2022, in St. Petersburg, Florida. 3 teenage boys moved silently through a neighborhood, like shadows in the night. 15-year-olds Mario Bonilla and Kandre Lang, along with 16-year-old Malachi Daniels, weren't out for a walk. They weren't going anywhere in particular. They were searching, not for something specific, but for opportunity. Lang used the edge of his shirt to pull on car door handles, one by one, careful not to leave fingerprints. They didn't expect anything dramatic, maybe a wallet, maybe loose change. But then, at a driveway near 62nd Avenue North and 28th Street North, they found it, a white 2016 Maserati, unlocked, keys sitting right there inside, waiting. Lang slid into the driver's seat. Vanilla took the front passenger spot. Daniels climbed in back. None of them had licenses. None of them had permission. None of them had any idea they were being watched. Overhead, silent in the night sky, a sheriff's helicopter had been circling the area on an unrelated call until it noticed movement below. 3 figures, checking cars, then slipping into the Maserati. The deputies in the air didn't hesitate. They radioed for ground units. At 3:20 a.m., the Maserati rolled out of the driveway and turned onto 62nd Avenue. No headlights, no hesitation. It was now a stolen vehicle on the move. On the ground, marked patrol cars pulled up, emergency lights flashing. But the chase didn't happen the way you'd expect. The Pinellas County Sheriff's Office had rules. No high-speed pursuits unless absolutely necessary. A supervising sergeant called it off. Deputies slowed to 35 miles per hour and fell back. But Lang didn't know that. He thought he was being hunted. He panicked. He floored it. The helicopter continued to track the car from above, recording everything. Lang pushed the gas harder, faster. The Maserati tore through the night like a bullet, and then, in an instant, everything shattered. The car was flying, 123 miles per hour. No seatbelts, no control. The Maserati jumped a curb, slammed into a business sign, flipped, and came crashing down on its roof in a parking lot. Crushed, folded in half, Vanilla never had a chance. He died instantly in the passenger seat. Daniels was mangled in the back, critically injured, clinging to life. Lang survived, but barely, pulled from the wreckage with serious injuries. Deputies arrived within seconds. The scene was chaos. Broken glass, twisted steel, the stench of gasoline in the air. The helicopter's camera had caught it all, from the boys slipping into the car to the final, horrific crash just 90 seconds later. Inside the destroyed vehicle, investigators found something else. A .25 caliber handgun, rusted and old, unregistered since 1968. None of the boys were hardened criminals, but they were slipping. Just 3 weeks earlier, on September 11th, they had been stopped by deputies while wandering another neighborhood before dawn. Parents were called. No charges filed. Everyone hoped it was a close call, a warning. But that night, they left their homes unnoticed, slipped into the dark with no good plan and no idea what was coming. In the days after, investigators sat with the families. One father said he had even transferred his son to another school, hoping for a fresh start, hoping to steer him away from trouble. But fate had already turned. Sheriff Bob Gualtieri didn't sugarcoat it. They were making bad decisions, he said, and they hadn't faced any real consequences. Until now. The owner of the Maserati, who'd left the car unlocked with the keys inside, was contacted. His mistake, too, had consequences. At a press conference, the sheriff urged the public, lock your cars, don't leave keys inside, because one careless choice can lead to tragedy. And this was tragedy. One boy dead, another fighting for his life, the third alive but likely to spend years behind bars, all before reaching adulthood.